Welcome back to the Magic the Gathering unofficial audiobook podcast. Phil Dawson here. And good news, we hit 6 patrons. So we are welcoming Micah to the mix, a content human tier. Thank you so much, Micah, and all the patrons so far. You can join too by heading to patreon.com, search my name, Phil Dawson, and you will find the different tiers and get exclusive and personal content, and all of it is great support for the books. And as we grow, it just keeps me motivated and pumped to keep up with the chapters and really looking forward to the lore and story as we keep getting bigger. So thank you so much, and thank you very much, and check it out. Also, our Discord is up and running, and the link is now available in the show description. It's just getting going, so feel free to start some chats and comment, discuss the books, the characters, and anything else as we build a bit of a community surrounding the books and the Magic the Gathering lore. Lastly, another week, and we are still 5 stars. It's a beautiful thing, and I thank you so much. I really do. And as it turns out, you can only write reviews on like Apple Podcasts, and I have a hard time finding them because my region is like constantly changing. So it's kind of annoying. We're scrapping the review contest for now, but I do ask that you share with your friends, your play group, even your local game store, what we're doing here. And if you have any feedback, thoughts, you can also follow and message me on Twitter or Instagram at Phil in Sendai. I'd love hearing from you. So I hope I do. Okay, I think that covers everything. Let's go. Chapter 19. Urza and Xantcha walked away from Sarah's realm not long after Xantcha gave him her heart. Xantcha was scarcely wiser about the imperfections of Sarah's creations than she'd been when she walked into the palace, though it was clear that her presence, so close to the cocoon, affected not only the realm as a whole, but Sasana's recovery from the Aegis burns. For Sasana and Kennedir, Xantcha would have accepted Sarah's offer of transit to another natural and inherently balanced world, but the offer was not made a second time. Urza accepted Sarah's judgment. Even though he distrusted Xantcha as a Phyrexian, he'd been through too much with her to go on alone. He held Xantcha in his arms for that first terrible step across the chasm that separated a willfully created plane from the natural multiverse. She held a sealed chest nearly filled with gifts from Lady Sarah. The gifts included a miniature cocoon that was the perfect size for Xantcha's amber heart. Their first natural world was a tiny, airless moon circling another world that appeared to be one vast blue-green ocean, though Urza said otherwise. He made a chamber beneath the moon's surface and filled it with breathable air, his usual course in a place where he could survive indefinitely, but Xantcha could not. "A terrible thing, this," he said, removing Xantcha's heart from the chest and placing it in a niche he had just finished. "I believe it contains everything they took away from you, even your soul." Despite his incursion into Phyrexia and Lady Sarah's assertion that Xantcha wholly and entirely differed from any born man or woman, Urza wouldn't surrender his belief that she'd been stolen from her parents and abominably transformed by her Phyrexian captors. She no longer bothered arguing the point with him. It was reassuring to be treated as he had always treated her. "I would destroy it if I could find a way to return what it has taken. But that mystery does not solve itself easily, and I cannot devote my energies to it until I have determined the first plane of the Phyrexians, and my vengeance has feasted on their entrails. You will understand that vengeance must come first." Xantcha nodded unnecessarily. Urza had not asked her a question. His concentration did not extend beyond his own thoughts, and he didn't notice her head moving. "Sarah and I determined that the true number of natural planes in the multiverse cannot be counted, even by an immortal. If one started counting at the beginning, new planes would have emerged, and old planes would have disappeared before the count was concluded. This is not, however, an insurmountable problem, as we can be certain that the Phyrexians were not driven away from a freshly endangered plane. And while it would be a tragedy if their keystone plane had succumbed to entropy and reorganization, we need not blame ourselves for the loss. Thus, it is only necessary that I start somewhere and proceed with great precision until I reach the end, which, with the multiverse, it also is the beginning. Do you understand what this means?" Xantcha nodded again, confident that Urza would continue explaining himself until her answer was truthful. "Good. I will, of necessity, walk lightly. I had thought of creating my own plane. Such planes are always accessible across the chasm, but I would have to create a plane in which both you and I could thrive, and Sarah told me that such a creation would be quite difficult to manage. Black essence, which is to say your essence, and white, which is mine, are deeply opposed to each other and virtually impossible to balance in the microcosm of a created plane. Now, I do not shirk challenges, but I must avenge my brother before I allow myself the pleasures of pure research. Thus, I have to put certain creations out of my mind. I will make do with bolt holes such as this, which is I will forge of a proximity in the multiverse, and eventually one is within an easy walk of a particular plane. This should be an especial relief to you, Zancha, since I will keep your heart in such a place where it cannot be lost or disturbed. It's also useful for me, since when I know where you are, I also know where your heart is, and contrariwise as well. And Sarah has returned that crystal pendant I gave you. I was fleeing Phyrexia. He fished it out of one of the many boxes and draped it around Zancha's neck. You, I, and your heart, and my pendant, together make a single unit, a triangle, the strongest of angled structures. None of us can get lost. Triangles. Triangles with 4 points? It had to be mathematics. Of all the lessons Zancha had been taught in the Fane of Flesh, mathematics had come the hardest. She'd long since learned that she didn't need to understand the why of mathematics if she simply followed all the rules. If the rules turned her heart into one of the triangle's 4 parts, she'd keep quiet about it, and she'd survive with her heart in a niche on an airless moon the same way she'd survived the centuries when it had lain in the Phyrexian vault. "What do you need of me?" she asked, hoping to forestall any further discussion of unimaginable triangles. "You are good at sniffing out Phyrexians. When we reach a plane, I want you to explore it, as you would anyway, looking for infestations." "I'll need to use the sphere. Is that all right?" The modifications remained a sore point between them. "You'll fix it so it isn't black anymore?" Urza ignored her questions. "For me, being somewhere quickly is easier than getting there slowly. I will search for the victors, the folk who drove the Phyrexians out, and force them to create Phyrexia." "You'll do what you want," Zancha thought in the most private corner of her mind. Of course, so would she. Life was never better than when she was soaring the wind streams, chasing her curiosity, trading trinkets with strangers, and collecting the stories that born folk told. "What do I do if I find a Phyrexian infestation?" She liked the word, her mind filled with possible ways to drive out an infestation. "You run away. The moment you are aware of Phyrexians, you hide yourself in a meeting place. I'll point out to you, and you wait for me. I'll take no more chances with you and the Phyrexians. You are vulnerable to them, Zancha. It's no fault of yours. You're brave and good-spirited, but they tainted you. You are a bell-goat, and after you followed me to Phyrexia, my enemies were able to use you to find me, much as I will use your heart to find you." "I never told you the Ineffable's name. That's how they found you," Zancha thought, but said nothing. She'd made her choice to stay with Urza, even knowing his obsessions and madness. If he reordered his memories of the past to absolve himself of blame and responsibility, well, he'd done it before, and he'd do it again. Zancha believed in vengeance against Phyrexia and believed that Urza, with all his flaws, stood a better chance of achieving it than she. So they began their quest for the victors, the folk who'd driven the Phyrexians out of the natural multiverse. Urza set his mark on each world they visited, regardless of its hospitality. That way, he said, they would know when they'd come full circle. Zancha wasn't certain about the full circle notion, raised some of the same problems as a 4-pointed triangle, but the marks kept them from accidentally exploring the same world twice. It was no surprise to Zancha that they found very few hospitable worlds where the Phyrexians had not made an appearance. She'd been a dodger. She knew about the relentless explorations carried out by the Searcher priests. The first few decades after leaving Sarah's realm, she spent most of her time huddled up at whatever meeting place Urza designated. Then gradually, Urza had relaxed his rules. She could wander freely, provided she encountered no active Phyrexians. Thus began a long, golden period of wandering the multiverse. Every handful of worlds held one that was hospitable enough for Zancha to exchange Urza's armor for the sphere. Every 10 or 12 handfuls of hospitable worlds revealed one that was interesting, at least to Zancha. She became the tourist who delighted in minor variations, while Urza was on a single-minded quest. "They were here," he said when they rejoined each other. They met in a white stone grotto of a world where elves were the dominant species and civilization was measured by forests, not cities. "I know," Zancha agreed, having found the spoor of 2 searcher expeditions and heard tales of demons with glistening metallic skin in several languages. "Searchers came through a good long time ago. They're remembered as demons and the bringers of chaos. They came through again maybe 1,000 local years ago, but only in a few places. They collected beasts both times, I think. There's metal here, but no mines. The searchers will come back again. They're waiting for the elves to do the hard work of opening the ground. Urza nodded, though he wasn't happy. How did you learn such things? There are no centers of learning here. Few records in the ground or above it. I have found most frustrating. I talk to everyone, Urza. I trade with them, she explained, handing Urza a sack filled with trinkets and treasures, her profits, from 3 seasons wandering. He'd take them to the bolt hole where he kept her heart. Everyone has a story. A story? Zancha, what I want is the truth, the hearted truth. She squared her shoulders. The truth is, this is not the victor's world. I could have told you that before the sunset twice. And how could you have done that? No one here knows a word for war. Urza stiffened. A planeswalker didn't have to listen with his ears. He could skim thought and meaning directly off the surface of another mind and drink down a new language like water. As a result, Urza seldom paid attention to the actual words he heard or spoke. He handled surprise poorly, embarrassment worse. His breathing stopped and his eyes shed their mortal illusion. I have encountered a new world, he snapped after a pensive moment. Equilor. His lips hadn't moved. Zancha didn't believe him, although Equilor wasn't a word that she remembered hearing on this or any other world. Is it a name? She asked cautiously. An old name, the oldest name, the farthest plane. It belongs to a plane on the edge of time. Another created world like Phyrexia or Sarah's realm? No, I think not. I hope not. She'd wager, if she'd ever been the wagering sort, that Urza hadn't learned of Equilor from the elves of the forest world, but had heard it years ago and forgotten it till just now when she challenged him. They set out at once, with no more preparation than Urza made for any between-worlds journey. He explained that preparation and, especially directions, weren't important. Walking between the worlds wasn't like walking down a path. There was no north or south, left or right, only the background glow of all the planes that were, and rising out of the glow, a sense of those planes that a walker could reach in a single stride. By choosing the faintest of the rising planes at each step, Urza insisted they would in time arrive at Equilor, the plane on the edge of time. Zancha couldn't imagine a place where direction didn't matter, but then, for her, the between-worlds remained as hostile as it had been the first time Urza dragged her through it. For her, the between-worlds was a changeless place of paradox and sheer terror. At first, the only evidence she had that Urza was doing anything different was indirect. Her armor crumbled the instant Urza released her. In the air of the next new world, there was breathable air in each new world they walked to, as if he'd at last given up the notion that the Phyrexians could have begun on a world without air, and Urza himself was exhausted when they arrived. He would go into the ground and sleep, as much as a local year, while she explored. There were some 30 worlds beyond the elven forest world when Urza announced as Zancha shook herself free of the flaking armor. Here you do not need to look for Phyrexians. Here we will find others of my kind. Urza didn't mean that he'd brought her to Dominaria. Every so often, he journeyed alone to the brink of his birth world to assure himself that it remained safe within the shard they discovered long ago. Urza meant instead that he'd broken an age-old habit and set them down on a plane where other walkers congregated. He'd never insinuated that he was unique, at least as far as walking between worlds. Sarah was a walker, and so Zancha suspected, had been the ineffable. But Urza had avoided other walkers until they came to the abandoned world he called Gastal. Be wary, he warned Zancha. I do not trust them. Without a plane to bind them, walkers forget what they were. They become predators, unless they go mad. Knowing Urza fell into the latter category, Zancha stayed carefully in his shadow as they approached a small, fanciful, and entirely illusory pavilion standing by itself on a barren, twilight plain. But the 3 men and 2 women they met there seemed unthreatening. They knew Urza, or knew of him, and welcomed him as a prodigal brother, though Zancha couldn't actually follow their conversation. Planeswalkers conversed directly in one another's mind. But Urza was not the only walker who tempered his solitary life with a more ordinary companion. Outside the pavilion, Zancha met 2 other women, one of them a blind dwarf who brayed the between-worlds on a walker's arm. Throughout the balmy night, the 3 of them sought a common language through which to share experience and advice. By dawn, they'd made progress in a Creole that was mixed mostly from elven dialects from 100 or more worlds. Zancha had just pieced together that Varatsu, a dwarf, had heard of Phyrexia when Urza emerged to say it was time to move on. Zancha rose reluctantly. Varatsu said that she and Manitar Kwa have crossed swords with folk made from flesh and metal. Words failed as a second sun, yellowish-green in color, loomed suddenly high overhead. The air exploded as it hurtled toward them. Zancha had the wit to be frightened, but hadn't begun to guess why or to yawn Urza's armor from the cyst, when the pavilion burst into screaming flames, and Urza seized her against his chest. He pulled her between worlds. Without the armor to protect her, she was bleeding and gasping when they re-emerged. Urza laid her on the ground and then cradled her face in his hands. "Don't go," he whispered. It seemed an incongruous request. Zancha was about to go anywhere. The between worlds had battered her to exhaustion. Her body seemed to have already fallen asleep. She wanted only to close her eyes and join it. "No!" Urza pinched her cheeks. "Stay awake! Stay with me!" Power like fire, countless sharp needles swirled around her. Zancha fought feebly to escape the pain. She pleaded with him to release her. "Live!" he shouted. "I won't let you die now!" Death would have been preferable to the torture flowing from Urza's fingers, but Zancha hadn't the strength to resist his will. Mote by mote, he healed her and dragged her back from the brink. "Sleep now, if you wish." His hand passed over her eyes. For an instant, there was darkness and oblivion. Then there was light, and Zancha was herself again. She exhaled a pent-up breath and sat up. "I don't know what came over me." "Death," said Urza calmly. "I nearly lost you." She remembered the yellow-green sun. "We must go back. Varatsu. Manatarqua." "Crossed swords with the Phyrexians, yes. Manatarqua was the pavilion. She died in Gastal." A shudder raced down Zancha's spine. There was more that Urza wasn't saying. "How long ago?" "In the time of this play, nearly 2 years." Zancha noticed her surroundings. A bare-walled chamber with a window, but not a door. She noticed herself. Her skin was white. It cracked and flaked when she moved, as if her armor clung in dead layers around her. Her hair, which she always hacked short around her face, hung below her shoulders. 2 years? She repeated, needing to say the words herself to make them true to her mind. "Long years?" "Very long," Urza assured her. "You've recovered. I never doubted that you would if I stayed beside you. You'll be hungry soon. I'll get you food now. Tomorrow or the next day we'll move on toward Equilor." Already Zancha felt her stomach churning to life. After 2 empty years, food would be nice, but there was another question. "At Gastal, Montaqua, you said she was the pavilion? Do you mean that she was Phyrexian and that you slew her?" "No, Montaqua was a walker like myself, but much younger. I have no idea why she presented herself as an object. I didn't ask. It was her choice. Perhaps she hoped to hide from her enemies." "Phyrexians?" "Other planeswalkers, I told you. We can become predatory, especially toward the newly sparked. I was nearly taken myself in the beginning. Meshival was her name. She was no threat to me. My eyes reveal sights no other walker can see. Until Sarah, I avoided my own kind. They had no part to play in my quest for vengeance. I'd been thinking about walkers since leaving Sarah's realm. I thought I might need someone more like myself." "But they died?" "Manataqua died. I suspect the others escaped unharmed, as I did. They prey on the young and the mortal because a mature walker is no easy target. But I had made up my mind almost from the start. I don't need another walker. I need you. To finally realize that and then feel you die so soon afterward is almost enough to make me worship the fickle gods." Zancha imagined Urza on his knees or in a temple. She closed her eyes and laughed. He was gone when she reopened them, and she was too stiff yet to climb throughout the window. Her saner self insisted that Urza wouldn't abandon her, not after sitting beside her for 2 years, not after what he just said about needing her. Then this world's sun passed beyond the window. Sanity's voice grew weaker as shadows lengthened. Of all the ways Zancha knew to die, starvation was among the worst. She had dragged herself to the window and was hauling herself over the sill when she felt a breeze at her back. The breeze was thick with fresh bread, roasted meat, and fruit. Urza had returned. He called the meal a celebration and ate with her, at least until a more ordinary sort of tiredness drove Zancha back to the bed where she'd lain for so long. She awoke with the sun. There was a door beside the window, more food, and, somewhere beyond the sun, near the edge of time, a world called Equilor. Later, after they'd gotten to Dominaria, when Zancha sorted through her memories, the largest pile belonged to the years they had searched for Equilor. Every season, for much more than 1,000 Dominarian years, she and Urza wandered the multiverse, taking other worlds' measure. There were surprises and excitement, mostly of the minor variety. After Sarah's realm, Phyrexia seemed to lose interest in them, or at least had lost their trail. Though they sometimes found evidence of searcher priests and excavations, eventually everything they found was long abandoned. "I'm headed in the right direction," Urza would say whenever they came upon eroded ruins no one else would have noticed. I'm headed toward the world that cast them out. Zancha was never so confident, but she never understood how Urza found anything in the Between Worlds, much less how he distinguished hospitable worlds from inhospitable ones, near from far. She was content to follow a path that led endlessly away from the Phyrexia she knew and toward the vengeance that seemed equally distant, until the day when they came to a quiet, twilight world. The edge of time itself, Urza said as he released Zancha's wrist. She shed her armor and filled her lungs with the air that was unlike any other. Old, she said after a few moments. It's as if everything's finished, not dead, just done growing and changing. Even the mountains are smoothed down like they've been standing too long. But nothing's come to replace them. She gestured toward the great dark lump that dominated the landscape like a risen loaf of bread. Somehow I expected an edge to have sharp angles. Urza nodded. I expected a plane where everything had been put to use, not like this, neglected and left fallow. Yet not completely fallow. As twilight deepened, lights winked open near the solitary mountain. There was a road, too, a ribbon of worn gray stone, cut in chevrons and fitted so precisely that not a blade of grass grew between them. Urza insisted he had no advance idea of what a new plane was like, no way at all of selecting the exact place where his feet would touch the ground, yet, more often than not, he walked out of the Between Worlds in sight of a road and a town. They began to travel down the road. A carpet of bats took flight from the mountain, passing directly over their heads. When their shrill chirping had subsided, other noises punctuated the night. Howls, growls, and a bird with a sweet yet mournful song. Stars appeared, unfamiliar, of course, scattered sparsely across the clear, black sky. No moon outshone them, but it was the nature of moons to produce moonless nights now and again. What surprised Zancha was the scarcity of stars, as if time were stars and the black sky were itself the edge of time. A strange place, Zancha decided as they strode down the road. Not ominous or inhospitable, but filled with secrets. So long as one of them is Phyrexia, I won't care about the rest. The light came from cobweb globes hovering above the road and the 80 graceful houses of an unfortified town. Urza lifted himself into the air to examine them and reported solemnly that he had not a clue to their construction or operation. They simply are, he said, and my instinct is to leave them alone. Zancha smiled to herself. If that was Urza's instinct, then whatever the globes were, they weren't simple. A man came out to meet them. He appeared ordinary enough, though Zancha understood how deceptive an ordinary appearance could be, and it bothered her that she hadn't noticed him leave any one of the nearby houses, hadn't noticed him at all until he was some 50 paces ahead and walking toward them. He wore a knee-length robe over loose trousers, both woven from a pale, lightweight fiber that rippled as he moved and sparkled as if it were shot with silver. His hair and beard were dark auburn in the globe light and neatly trimmed. A few wrinkles creased the outer corners of his eyes. Zancha placed him in the prime of mortal life, but she'd place Urza there too. Welcome, Urza, the stranger said. Welcome to Equilor. We've been waiting for you.